Welcome to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to being well-informed. In a world buzzing with complex global events, sometimes just getting to the core of what's really going on feels like, well, a huge challenge. Today, we're doing just that. We're diving deep into the escalating legal and diplomatic drama surrounding former Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro. We've gone through a whole stack of sources, judicial reports, news articles, expert analyses, you name it, to pull out what you really need to know. Our goal: to unpack the serious charges Bolsonaro is facing, look at the pretty surprising interventions from the U.S., and then Brazil's very strong reactions. We want to give you the context and show why this whole international saga actually matters.
Exactly. And as we get into it, you'll see this isn't just a straightforward legal case. It's really a clash, isn't it? A clash of national sovereignty, different political ideas, and fundamental disagreements about how judicial power should even work. Understanding this really sheds light on the pressures facing democratic institutions everywhere.
Okay, let's start right there with the basics in Brazil. Our sources detail some really serious charges against Bolsonaro. What exactly is he accused of? What's the heart of the prosecution's case?
Well, the charges are extremely serious. We're talking leading an armed criminal organization, attempting to stage a coup, and attempting violent abolition of the democratic rule of law. Prosecutor General Paulo Gonea put it pretty bluntly. He said, the evidence is clear. The defendant acted systematically throughout his mandate and after his defeat at the polls to incite insurrection and the destabilization of the democratic rule of law. And the evidence they point to is, well, quite extensive. Things like recordings, handwritten notes, but also digital files, spreadsheets, and exchanges of electronic messages. So a mix of things.
Wow, those are definitely heavy accusations. Systematic action, attempting a coup. So what could this mean for Bolsonaro personally if he's convicted?
The potential penalties are significant. Just the coup plot charge could mean up to 12 years. Add in the other charges, and sources suggest he could be facing decades behind bars. And it's important to remember, this isn't happening in a vacuum. Brazil's electoral court already barred him from running for office until 2030.
Right, for that abuse of political power and misinformation stuff.
Exactly. Related to his claims about rigged voting machines. So he's already facing political consequences now, these potentially massive legal ones.
Decades behind bars. That really catches your attention. And what's also striking, looking at the sources, are the immediate restrictions the court put on him. This feels like more than just standard procedure.
Oh, absolutely. The court imposed some very concrete limitations. He has to wear an electronic ankle monitor. Sources say that's because of a perceived concrete possibility he might try to flee.
An ankle monitor, really, for a former president.
Yes. And on top of that, he's barred from using social media. He's prohibited from contacting foreign officials or even going near foreign embassies or consulates inside Brazil. He can't even contact key political allies or co-defendants, which includes his own son, Eduardo Bolsonaro. Plus, there's a nighttime and weekend curfew. He has to be reachable 24/7, and he absolutely cannot leave the country without permission. It's a very tight leash.
And how has Bolsonaro reacted to all this? He hasn't been quiet.
No, not at all. He's publicly called these measures a supreme humiliation. He denies everything, saying things like, nothing was even considered, and even if it had been considered, since nothing started, there's no crime. He consistently frames it as political persecution, a witch hunt.
Which ties into the raids we saw earlier, right, on his home and party offices.
Exactly. He points to those raids as part of this narrative, arguing the whole system is politically motivated against him.
Okay, so that's the situation in Brazil. But then this story takes a really sharp turn with direct U.S. involvement. How did the Trump administration step into this?
Yeah, this is where it gets truly international. Donald Trump has been extremely vocal supporting Bolsonaro. He's using that same witch hunt language. Trump flat out said Bolsonaro's not guilty of anything except having fought for the people. And he actually demanded Brazil drop the case.
Demanded? That's strong language between nations. And it wasn't just talk, was it? The U.S. applied actual pressure.
That's right. Real concrete pressure. Economically, Trump announced a huge 50% import tax on Brazilian goods, scheduled to start August 1st. And crucially, this was explicitly tied to Bolsonaro's trial.
50%. Wow. How is that seen?
Well, some sources we looked at called it a breach of the rule of non-intervention, even labeling it coercion as extortion. Very strong criticism. And then there was diplomatic pressure, too. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced visa revocations targeting the main judge, Supreme Court Justice Alexandre de Moraes, plus some unnamed allies on the court, and even their immediate families.
Visa revocations for judges and their families. What was the official justification given by the U.S. for such, well, drastic steps against another country's judiciary?
The stated reasons from Rubio revolved around calling Moras's actions a political witch hunt, and, interestingly, censorship of protected expression. Rubio argued this censorship extends beyond Brazil's shores to target Americans. He specifically accused Moraz of overstepping by ordering social media platforms like X and Rumble to block accounts and content, including, he claimed, accounts of U.S. citizens or companies, and fining them when they didn't comply.
So the argument was partly about protecting U.S. interests and citizens online.
That was the frame, yes. They invoked the Global Magnitsky Act as the potential legal basis for these sanctions, which is usually reserved for human rights abuses or major corruption. It's also worth adding there's this background detail. Brazilian police sources accused Bolsonaro and his son Eduardo of actually lobbying in Washington, D.C. to influence the administration of U.S. President Donald Trump to impose sanctions on Brazil.
Huh. So, lobbying for sanctions against their own country. And the White House backed this up.
Yes. White House spokesperson Anna Kelly echoed the sentiment, saying, Bolsonaro and his supporters are under attack from a weaponized court system. So, a unified message there.
Okay, facing that kind of pressure, economic tariffs, visa bans, strong accusations, how did Brazil push back? President Lula didn't just roll over, did he?
Oh, definitely not. President Lula's reaction was incredibly strong, even defiant. He slammed the U.S. actions as arbitrary, baseless interference and called the whole thing unacceptable blackmail. He famously declared, and this really resonated, no gringo is going to give orders to this president. Using that colloquial, sometimes loaded term for foreigner really underlined his point.
That's quite a statement. Did the foreign ministry follow that line?
They did. Brazil's foreign ministry formally stated these U.S. claims were undue and unacceptable interference in matters under the jurisdiction of the Brazilian judiciary. A very clear rejection.
So, beyond the strong words, is Brazil actually considering hitting back? What kind of countermeasures are on the table?
They are looking at options, yes, particularly economic ones. Things being studied include potentially ending U.S. drug patent licensing, which could be significant, and also taxing big tech firms operating in Brazil. Reciprocal tariffs were mentioned as a possibility, although the finance minister, Fernando Haddad, specifically denied they were looking at limiting dividends as a form of retaliation.
Interesting. And how has this whole standoff played out for Lula domestically?
Actually, quite positively for him, according to some analyses. This confrontation seems to have helped revive his flagging popularity. The narrative of Lula standing up for Brazil against, perceived foreign bullying seems to have struck a chord with many Brazilians who saw Trump's comments as definite overreach.
So, defending national sovereignty is popular, even when it's complicated. What about the judiciary itself? How did they respond to the U.S. pressure and accusations?
They defended their position very robustly. Justice Moraes, the main target of the U.S. criticism, directly accused Trump's tariff threats of being an attempt to create a serious economic crisis in Brazil to interfere in the country's judicial system. And Justice Luis Roberto Barroso stated flatly that the U.S. sanctions are based on an inaccurate understanding of what's happening in Brazil, asserting, in today's Brazil, no one is persecuted. That stance got backing, too. A 5-judge Supreme Court panel upheld Moraes' key decisions in the case.
So a united front from the judiciary and the public mood.
Well, sources suggest a pretty broad consensus among Brazilians against U.S. interference. There's a strong feeling about needing to preserve their democracy and avoid any slide back towards authoritarianism.
Okay, let's zoom out a bit. The comparisons between Bolsonaro and Trump are almost constant. The Trump of the tropics label. Let's unpack those parallels, but maybe more importantly, the differences in how their legal challenges are playing out. It tells us something about the systems, right?
Absolutely. The similarities are striking. Both are often described as far-right law and order populists. Both use very strong rhetoric and a kind of populist discourse by inciting fear and anger. Okay. And the parallels in their actions are uncanny. Both lost re-election, both claimed the election was rigged, and then supporters of both stormed major government buildings, the U.S. Capitol, on January 6, 2021, and Brazil's Congress just 2 days later, January 8, 2023. Wait, no, that was 2023, January 8, 2023.
Right, the timelines are very close. But despite all these echoes, their legal paths are diverging quite dramatically now.
They really are. Look at Bolsonaro. He's already barred from running for elections for 8 years, as we said, and now he's actually on trial for plotting a coup, facing potentially decades in jail. Compare that to the U.S. The U.S. Supreme Court recently made that landmark ruling that individual states cannot bar Trump from the ballot based on the 14th Amendment's insurrection clause. They said only Congress has that power for federal candidates, citing federalism principles.
So different constitutional interpretations leading to very different outcomes. Does Brazil have something specific in its law that leads to this difference?
It does. Brazil has a law called ficha limpa, which translates to clean slate. Basically, it stipulates that if you're convicted of certain offenses, you automatically become ineligible to run for office for a set period. This creates a level of, let's call it predictability. It ties political eligibility directly to certain judicial outcomes, arguably reducing the need for courts to make direct interventions in purely political eligibility questions in the way the U.S. system sometimes requires. It's a different mechanism entirely.
So reflecting on all this, what's the big picture takeaway for you listening to this deep dive?
Oh.
It seems the Bolsonaro saga is like a magnifying glass on some huge challenges democracies are facing everywhere. We're seeing issues of election integrity, how to handle populist movements, that constant tension between national sovereignty and, well, international pressure or perceived interference.
Absolutely. What's really fascinating here, I think, is seeing how quickly these domestic legal fights can spiral into major international incidents. They really test the limits of diplomacy, don't they? And they can shift public opinion in ways you wouldn't expect.
It really makes you think, and maybe this is the question to leave you with. In a world that's more connected than ever, where do we draw the line on national sovereignty? Especially when powerful countries see another nation's internal court cases as maybe a threat to their own interests or their ideology or even their global standing. Where does that line really lie?